Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexandra Lauder. I'm the Community and Economic Development Planner for the town of Tewksbury. I want to thank all the folks that are in the room that came here tonight, as well as everybody watching at home, hopefully. This is going to be a presentation about the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program that the town of Tewksbury participates in. We were awarded a grant last year to investigate chronic flooding issues in town, and I have lovely folks to the left of me here from Merrimack River Watershed Council, Weston and Sampson, and our town engineer, Kevin Hardeman, as well. And they are going to go through some of the data that we collected in the survey that we put out a few months ago, where the flooding seems to be most persistent in town, what the town is currently doing to address the flooding, and what we're looking to do in the future. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. Are we doing that first, or are we just going to let Lauren start? All right. I'll hand it off to Lauren from Merrimack River Watershed Council to kick us off.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. We know in-person events are kind of new to most of us recently, so we appreciate it. And for those at home, also appreciate you joining us on the YouTube channel. We are a small group tonight, so if you have questions, comments, please, speak up, raise your hand. There are a few moments that we will be collecting input from the audience, and we'll be doing that on a smartphone. So if you have a smartphone, maybe pull that out and have that at the ready, and we'll ask some simple questions just to get some feedback from you guys. So the agenda for tonight, we'll start off with a very simple poll asking about flooding, and then we're going to jump into kind of past issues around stormwater and flooding in Tewksbury, then looking to the future, how some of this will change or is expected to change under climate change. Looking at green infrastructure, what it is and how it can provide some solutions to our problems, and then kind of look at what's already been done in terms of stormwater management, and then looking towards the future. And then at the end, we'll have some questions, time for questions, using, again, this kind of online system. So we have questions here and online. So folks online, feel free to engage as well. So we have quite a large project team, and I just want to thank all of our team members for being here tonight. They'll introduce themselves individually, but we do have a steering committee that we've been working together for the past several months. So we'd like to thank our colleagues from the town of Tewksbury, the Department of Public Works, the Conservation Commission, the Housing Authority, Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee, our Weston and Sampson, our engineers, and then us at the Merrimack River Watershed Council have been helping with outreach and education. So there's a whole team of us here today to kind of explain what we've been working on and answer any questions that you have. So first, we want to kind of thank our funder. So like Alex said, this is an MVP grant, a Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Action Grant. This is very much based around climate change. So we know that things are going to get more wet and they're going to get more dry at the same time, and things are just going to be different. And so the infrastructure, how things have been set up in the past, isn't exactly built for how things are going to be in the future. So this is a grant program run by the state of Massachusetts that gets awarded to different municipalities to really focus on this climate resiliency question, and do it in a very unique way. We want to focus on nature-based solutions, working with our communities, kind of thinking outside of the box, getting creative, and this grant allows municipalities to do that. So there's kind of two phases to this grant. First, you do all the planning. We all know planning comes before any action. So Tewksbury has been doing this in 2019 and 2020, and then in 2021, we were awarded an action grant. So we take the plans that we did and we put them in place. As you can see on the map, many municipalities across the state have taken advantage of this grant program, so we're also happy to be part of this group. So for our specific projects around flooding and green infrastructure, we have three goals. So first, we wanted to engage with the citizens, the people who live here, who use the roads and infrastructure of Tewksbury, and ask them, okay, where are you experiencing flooding issues, and how is it impacting you? So we had a survey that we did town-wide earlier this year. I hope many of you responded to that, but we'll talk about those results later today. We wanted to take kind of those areas where flooding is happening and kind of understand how can we help that. So looking at town-owned parcels, how can we implement some green infrastructure solutions to help reduce or mitigate flooding that's already happening. And then while we're doing this, we want to consider our affordable housing issues within the town. So kind of looking at it from a holistic viewpoint. So now this is where we go and collect some data from you guys here in the room and online. So if you take out your smartphones and you go to www.menti.com, we have a couple questions for you. So here we go. So if you do have your phone out, if you go to menti.com and enter this code, the code is 42897475. Or if you're super fancy and you want to use the QR code, you could use that as well. So again, that code is 42897475. Yeah, so folks on YouTube, let's make it happen. So we're feeling okay to move on? Everyone looks like they're still focusing in the room. Yep, 42897475. Oh, we got a couple people in the room here. Okay, so our first question is going to be, why are you here today? What drove you to leave your comfortable couch after a long day of work and come hang out with us at the library? So you can put in one word, a short sentence, whatever you want, for why you wanted to join us today. I know we're all, yeah, so we don't know who says what. It's very anonymous.
Unless you want to participate with us. Yeah. I don't care, but I'm already a student of the environment because I have Detention Basin for my yard.
Okay, nice. Very nice. So she has a retention basin in her front yard. Seeing some nice responses here. Climate change. People are concerned about it. I think we all know that things are going to change. So what does that mean for us personally and for the town? We think it's important, having... we drive around this town every day, and we want to make sure that we're safe, our kids are safe, our parents are safe. You're a resident part of the press. That's super interesting. Welcome. Happy to have you here. Yeah, Open Space Committee, great. We think the work that you're doing is awesome, great also. So yeah, very cool. So people, and we have some people who experience flooding themselves. So yeah, all different reasons, but kind of related to, we want to know what the problem is and how we're going to fix it. Woohoo, even more, this is great. Okay, yep, see more climate change, more flooding concerns, people who have experienced flooding, so near and dear to our heart. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. So first I'm going to show you a series of photos, and the next slide you can vote on them. But what do you consider flooding? Do you consider any of these options flooding? So I'll describe them to you. First option, we see a road that is completely covered in water. In the back, the police have cordoned it off so no one can pass. And it looks fairly deep. It looks maybe this water is going up over a bridge. Option two is we have a depth of water in a natural area. So we got some water grasses. We can see a lot of green space, and then maybe a couple inches of water within the grass. And option three is in a residential area, and it looks like quite a large puddle covering the width of this street. So these are options 1, 2, and 3. So what do you consider flooding? So you can put that in your Mentimeter, and you can choose more than one option. So if you think only one is flooding or all three is flooding, you're welcome to put in what you think. Okay, we got a lot of option 1, a little less of option 3. Only a couple people for option 2. Okay, what I will tell you is a trick question. Technically, all of those were flooding. So flooding is where a normally dry area has a lot of water that's covering it for a period of time. So the first picture, that road, normally dry, we can drive across it. Second picture, it's probably a field somewhere or maybe a wetland, but typically it's a little bit dry. And 7, that road usually doesn't have that big puddle there. But what the real issue that we're looking here is, how does this flooding impact our lives? So I think the first photo, very clear, can't drive across that bridge. That bridge may be the only way to get across that river, and that's a huge inconvenience to many, many, many people. The second one, where we have our nice nature area that's flooded, kind of natural. Most people aren't driving to school through that wetland or walking through it to get to the grocery store. In many ways, that's actually beneficial flooding. The frogs love it, the plants love it, the soils love it. That's kind of a good place for flooding to happen. And then the last photo, maybe it doesn't seem such a big inconvenience. You could probably drive through that puddle, right? But if you are in a wheelchair or you walk to school, your kids have to walk through that puddle, that is a huge inconvenience for you. So different populations might be impacted by different kinds of flooding. So I appreciate all your input, both in the room and online. I think that was great. And now I'm actually going to hand it over to Susie. And she is going to kind of describe stormwater and flooding in Tewksbury and how it's happened in the past.
Thanks, Lauren. My name's Susie Bresney. I'm also with the Merrimack River Watershed Council. So I think a key takeaway from what we just looked at is that flooding, or at least the word, can sometimes be a little bit subjective. If it's problematic to you, you probably call it flooding. If it's a wet area that you don't go near or worry about, it's probably not flooding. So throughout this talk, we're going to refer more to this problem as stormwater management. So moving water from a place where it's problematic to a place where it's not problematic or even beneficial. So to kind of backtrack a little bit and think about, why is stormwater an issue in Tewksbury and why do we need stormwater management? So historically, Tewksbury is a pretty wet area. This map is Tewksbury in 1893, and that blue overlay shows all of the areas that are either wetlands, streams, lakes, ponds. So it's a pretty wet area. In 1893, you can see there wasn't a ton of development. There are some roads, but not a whole lot. So at this point in time, water could infiltrate into the ground. Rivers could utilize their floodplains or spill over into their floodplains as they do naturally, and no one really minded. And at this point in time, stormwater was actually good for the natural river and wetland ecosystems that exist around Tewksbury. As time goes on, this map is from 1918, so those 2 pink areas that are circled, you can start to see more development happening in the center of town and in the southernmost corner down in town. More development is occurring. And then as we look to current day, which this map shows, we see not just development in those 2 areas, but actually development all over town. So this pink is impervious surfaces or surfaces that water can't permeate through. So roads, houses, buildings. Development is good for town, right? It's good for the economy. Housing is good for people. But development in a historically wet area can present some challenges. It can mean that there's more increased runoff because where the space used to be open, it's now parking lots or roads. Floodplains might be restricted because houses or buildings have been developed along them, so rivers can't overflow as they did previously. And now stormwater is actually problematic. So where naturally it was good for the ecosystem, now it's problematic for people and for our ability to travel around. That's why we talk about stormwater management. So to get an understanding of kind of the flooding, a big picture of the flooding today in Tewksbury and how it affects people, we conducted a survey, as has been mentioned a few months ago. And this survey focused on flooding, green infrastructure, and preferences for affordable housing development. We conducted it between January 14th and March 25th earlier this year. It was available in Spanish and English online and in print. We had it right here at the library available in print. And we received 123 responses. So on this map here, all of those dark blue dots with the red center, those show, that's a map of the density of responses that we received. So everywhere there's a blue dot, that's where a respondent said that they experience flooding to some extent. Where the dot is kind of bigger or has more red, there were multiple people who said that same location. So we were able to see that flooding issues are pretty widespread across town, but in the southernmost corner, where we also happened to see a lot of development previously, that's an area where there's a lot of flooding, a lot of people experience flooding. If you can see behind those blue and red dots, there are these gray and blue dots, and those are the areas where the town knows or is aware of some kind of flooding issue or drainage problem. So you can see that the survey presented a lot of new locations that previously weren't investigated of where flooding happens. So the information from this survey was incorporated into the modeling that Weston and Sampson did, which they'll be talking about here shortly. And is available for the town to kind of further investigate and improve down the road. So a couple quick results of the survey. So we had 106 people responded that they experience flooding regularly, so not just during extreme events like the Mother's Day flood, but kind of consistently year after year. And 57 people experience extreme event flooding. So that might be like the Mother's Day flood, or last summer in July, there was a ton of rain. And so that's what we're calling extreme event flooding. So the majority of people in both cases said that the flooding will last a few days. Also, the depth of the flooding varied, as we'd expect, for the different types of flooding. So for regular flooding, most people said it was between 1 and 6 inches deep, whereas for extreme event flooding, most people said 6 to 12 inches deep, with some other varied responses as well. And the source that people identified that was likely the source of the flooding was consistent in both cases, both types of flooding as well, mostly backing up of road drains, but also nearby river or stream is an important result for extreme event flooding. And this is important to understand because different flooding issues require different kinds of solutions. So this is helpful also to kind of characterize the different issues are that today we'll be talking about green infrastructure as one solution, but there are many varied solutions that need to be utilized to address these issues. And the last result I want to highlight is that 105 people who took the survey, or 85% of respondents, said that they would like to see more public outreach about green infrastructure, both in general and specific to what the town is doing to implement green infrastructure. So that's why we're here today, to talk about that and to kind of help people understand a bit more and answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Weston and Sampson, who's going to soon answer this question, what is green infrastructure that we keep talking about?
Thank you so much, Susie. My name is Jeree Schwartz. I'm with Weston and Sampson. And I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on climate change, just for everyone to gain a little bit of understanding regarding the trends that we're currently seeing. So right now, precipitation during heavy events in the Northeast is increasing by about 70% in the last 50 years. That's compared to annual rainfall amounts, which are increasing by about 10% over the last 50 years. So you can really see that difference with those extreme storm events is where we're really seeing the increased amount of rainfall. And I guess a lot of what we do relates to stormwater management and sampling. And so I guess even in our own work, we're seeing a lot of trends, like last spring in particular. We do a lot of wet weather sampling in the springtime, and ironically enough, we're seeing the drier springs recently. But then like last summer, we saw a lot of rainfall. I think if we look back into July, it was about 10 inches of rain that fell that month. So, I mean, unprecedented. Usually we'd see like 48 inches of rainfall in a given year, and that averages about 4 inches a month. So 10 inches last July was a record-setting amount. Sure. So precipitation does, you're right, it includes both rainfall and snowfall as well. So total precipitation over the course of the year. So here, just to kind of see the difference. So a lot of our work in terms of designing stormwater management systems, we're looking at different design storm standards, and those are changing as well. So it used to be that, for instance, in 24 hours, you might see 6.5 inches of rainfall, and that would be equivalent to a 100-year event. And nowadays, that's looking more like 8.4 inches of rainfall. So obviously, when we're designing, we always have to meet certain standards, and we're trying to design to the largest event possible that we can accommodate given the infrastructure. But it's just interesting to see the, especially when you're looking at the 100-year event and how much that's increased in terms of the total rainfall amount. And here is kind of just a snapshot here, looking at in particular the Shawnsheen River Watershed. So we're seeing about those annual days are predicted to increase a lot in terms of the amount of rainfall we're seeing. It looks like, going out to 2100, we're seeing about 4 inches of precipitation happening at least, looks like 1.4 days in a given year. So that's very significant, thinking about more than 4 inches of rain falling. And then just kind of touching again on some of the percentages here, an 8% increase in extreme precipitation events in northeastern U.S. Is predicted by 2050, and then looking ahead to 2100, we're thinking about a 13% increase in extreme precipitation. So again, it's really surrounding those extreme events where we're seeing that increase in rainfall. And this kind of just provides a summary of some of the feedback that was received based on the survey, and it sounds like residents are reporting the same trends as well. In terms of, I think we had like 70% of residents are saying that. They're also saying that, storm events are occurring more frequently, and they're seeing more precipitation associated with those storm events as well. And with those more frequent events, there's less opportunity for stormwater to infiltrate, and we need to start thinking about other opportunities than those traditional stormwater management techniques. And that's where it lends itself to talk about those nature-based solutions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to kind of provide an overview there. Oh, sorry, Jenny.
Thanks so much, Therese. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Moonen from Weston and Sampson. Can you all hear me all right with the mask on? Good. Awesome. All right. I'm going to butcher this definition unless I read it to you. I apologize. It's the only thing I'm going to read. But so nature-based solutions are adaptation measures focused on the protection, restoration, and or management of ecological systems. Their goal is about safeguarding public health, providing clean air and water, increasing resilience to natural hazards like precipitation that we've been talking about, more extreme winter events, and sequester carbon. The goal of the state's program is to promote these solutions as a means for not only flood reduction, but what we call co-benefits. So co-benefits are things like improving water quality. So actually removing pollutants from the stormwater runoff before they get into our local water bodies and wetlands. And that's also helping the town with compliance with federal and state stormwater standards. Reducing what's called urban heat island effect. And I know that Tewksbury, is a fairly residential community with lots of greenery, but there still are neighborhoods and areas that have lots of pavement, less trees, and in the long term, those areas are predicted to become warmer, and that will affect the populations and enjoyment of the community. So nature-based solutions help reduce urban heat island effects. We provide habitat for all sorts of things, pollinators and a variety of species. One of the goals is to help reduce maintenance of the drainage system. Instead of pipes being underground that the town has to dig up and replace, which is very costly. Now it's on the surface, and you can deal with things with landscaping, with community support, with active garden clubs. And also, statistically, these solutions are shown to increase property values. Just bear with me. I can't breathe through this thing a little bit. So I'm just going to go over some of the big picture tools. Part of this grant is giving the town like a toolbox of solutions to be thinking about moving forward in implementing municipal projects, whether it's roadway projects, building projects. So there's a number of different ways you can implement nature-based solutions. One of those examples is what's called like a bioretention basin. This is also referred to as a rain garden. Has anyone heard that term? Yeah. So it's just, it's an area that allows for plantings, a bunch of different layers of soil. When water goes into it, it removes pollution. It can fill up with water sometimes and then drain slowly into the ground or overflow into the drainage system with cleaner water. Permeable paving is actually a nature-based solution. There's a lot of different types of pavers. You might see it as asphalt, where if you pour water on it, like if you're in Provincetown, if you pour water on the ground, it goes right through the pavement. It might be in the form of pavers. So what it does is it allows the water that actually falls on it to just go back into the ground. This isn't about water quality improvements, but it does help get water away from ponding and pooling. Sorry. Planter boxes are a way in more sort of like, I call them urban settings, but basically areas with sidewalks or like along parking lots. And effectively, it's taking your bioretention basin and putting it in a planter box, if that makes sense to everyone. There's also this thing called tree box filter. Sometimes you hear about them being called like a tree pit, if you will. And that's basically where you plant a tree and have a bunch of soil around it as well. And it's capturing the runoff, it goes up into the tree. It also treats it, and then it can overflow into the drainage system. So these are all great for smaller projects along parking lots. And then there's some solutions that you can also use where you have a little bit more space, like a swale, which is basically a sloped area that moves water along, and it might infiltrate it and treat it. It might just be conveying water to one of these other practices. And while it's not a nature-based solution, we always like to mention underground storage, because when you talk about flooding, sometimes you're talking about a lot of water, right, in the examples that they gave earlier. So we like to couple underground storage systems that will actually capture like a lot of water and put it back in the ground, or detain it and couple it with these projects, these other types of bioretention and nature-based solutions. So Andrew is going to help talk a little bit about the process we went through.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm Andrew Wojak from Weston and Sampson, and I'm just going to kind of go through how we looked for places to put this green infrastructure that she just went through. So for this project, it was kind of town-wide, and we really started looking at parcels that are town-owned, because that's kind of the easier areas to implement these projects. So one of the first things we looked at was actually, are these parcels, areas, sites feasible for green infrastructure? So can we install them, and will they work? So here's some of the things that we kind of went through. So we used basically a desktop approach, and we took sources from mapping, GIS, different data to look at, okay, is the soil classification and infiltration properties right? Are there space constraints? Is it near drainage? Is it near impervious areas? And really, is this green infrastructure feasible, and will it be effective? Next, we looked at climate vulnerable populations. So really looking at areas of town where are there populations that are going to be most affected by the impacts of climate change, more regional flooding, etc. So here are some of the populations that we kind of factored into this prioritization of all of the town-owned parcels. So here's just kind of an overview map of how we did the prioritization of the parcels. So in green is more suitable for green infrastructure or located near climate vulnerable populations, and red is low priority. So we don't have to get into the details of this map, but this kind of shows the town-wide approach of how we were prioritizing each of these parcels for green infrastructure. So we went through that analysis, and we basically got 38 parcels that were higher priority. It would fit in with the climate vulnerable populations, it fit into the flood survey data and the town confirmed flooding areas, and it was suitable for green infrastructure. So our next step was basically to do site assessments. We started on a desktop approach and went site by site and kind of, are there any red flags? It obviously won't work for green infrastructure, or these are good areas. We discussed with the project committee to see if there was any town knowledge of, oh, we just did a project here. This may be in our capital improvement plan, which would make it a better option for green infrastructure, easier for the town to incorporate. And then we basically identified our top sites to move forward some of the conceptual designs for this green infrastructure. So the sites that we kind of landed on, here's the prioritization map. To the left, you have the Lowell Street neighborhood. So there was town-confirmed flooding, some flooding survey data, town-owned parcel, and some right-of-way areas that were suitable for green infrastructure. Next, we have the public library where we are. It's a good option. It's highly visible to the public, and there's some areas to incorporate here. The Town Hall campus area, these are two separate parcels located on Town Hall Avenue near Main Street, and this is kind of in the center of town, lots of impervious area, lots of stormwater runoff, town-owned, and some good space for green infrastructure. And then lastly, the East Street athletic fields, again, near some of the flooding locations, and it was a suitable site. So here we're just going to go through some of the sites and do some of the renderings for you guys to get kind of an idea of what this green infrastructure would look like. So here is the East Street athletic field. It's kind of the corner of East Street and Chandler Street up top. Here's the before picture, and I will let Jenny talk about the renderings for the green infrastructure.
Yeah, so the intent of these is to give you guys a sense of what it might look like. And so this would be a bioretention basin. And what the goal here is to take some of the runoff from East Street, am I correct, Andrew? Yep. Yeah. Take some of the runoff from East Street that's coming down the hill with the old hospital, because there's an area of ponding sort of at the lower end of East Street. What we're doing is trying to capture the runoff from that area in here. And it's great because it could also create some outdoor space for the council on Aging across the street. Senior Center, I'm so sorry, I apologize. So that's the intent here. It's a great spot. It's highly visible, and so that's this concept. That's what it would look like. Sorry, Andrew.
So here is over to the Town Hall campus area that I was talking about. This is the Town Hall Annex building and the fire department building in the back. So here's kind of the before picture. On the right, you have Dewey Street. There's some flooding issues there. Again, this is a good town-owned parcel, highly visible to the public, and it had some space for green infrastructure. So here's the renderings for this one.
So this is just a concept of what could be done, but the idea is to take water with some new piped infrastructure on Dewey Street and put it into a bioretention basin sort of in the back of the annex building. And it could provide outdoor space or not, kind of depending on how the final design went, but the overflow would be into the roadway that's already there. So what it would do is help capture the runoff that currently is sort of builds up on Dewey Street and treat it and remove pollutants that we're worried about, like phosphorus and nitrogen, and also create some habitat.
So here's the same town hall area. This is actually the town hall common in front of the main building. Again, it's along Main Street here, the same vicinity as the last one, and here's the before picture, and then here's the after picture.
So, I mean, this, again, it's a concept. It's sized to get runoff from a good portion of the town hall campus. And there's a lot of space in that area. There's no mature trees currently that we would be impacting. And, you know, there's not walkways shown on here, but you could weave it into walkways as part of future planning. So it could provide a nice area with some shade. There could even be some additional trees, et cetera.
And then lastly, this is one of the intersections in the Lowell Street neighborhood that I mentioned earlier. We have a few different designs in this area, but here's just one of the proposed projects that we have a conceptual design for. So on the right, you can see a little bit of ponding there. This is the intersection, existing conditions, and here's what we're proposing.
So the idea here would be a combination of underground storage, potentially pervious pavement, whether that's pavers or asphalt, with some small bioretention basin areas or swales along the curbs. If you can see them, they're on sort of the northeast corner and the southwest corner. And so the idea here is that you would capture a small area of drainage and get it back into the ground to deal with flooding, like we talked about at the beginning, like the flooding where you can't walk through it or you have to walk around it. And this is just a way that the town could do sort of a green street kind of concept as part of its toolbox, thinking long term. And with that, we are going to turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Andrew and Jenny. Good evening. So I'm Kevin Hardeman. I'm the town engineer, and I'm going to talk about some of the past programs we've done for stormwater and what we're doing now to advance our stormwater capabilities. So as everyone in this room knows, Tewksbury's growing. Tewksbury's been growing. And throughout that growth process, stormwater's kind of been left behind. The zoning bylaw, past and present, specifically state what you can do on a property, height, size, width, setbacks, things like that. But the regulations for stormwater aren't that detailed. So it's gotten left behind. A lot of Tewksbury does not have stormwater infrastructure. It's a lot of country drainage, which does not provide for treatment of runoff from impervious surfaces. And that runoff then goes into water bodies and wetlands and things. And it's not the best practice for the environment. In 1997, DEP implemented the Stormwater Management Program and the Stormwater Management Standards. And that kind of set the bar for what developments have to do to meet those standards to ensure clean runoff. The problem is it was geared towards larger developments, and it was geared towards water treatment as opposed to attenuating large volumes of water. So flooding wasn't effectively hindered, and because that didn't take into account the large flow you get off of large impervious areas for developments, flooding became more and more of a problem. So in 2008, DEP implemented newer regulations to address that, but it still misses that piece about the volume of runoff from a site. You can't increase the peak flow, but it doesn't address how much water leaves the site, just how quickly it leaves the site. So Tewksbury, with the country drainage, that was installed years and years ago, it's aging. Right? It needs to be repaired. It needs to be replaced. It needs to be upgraded. And unfortunately, at the DPW, a lot of what we do is reactionary. Okay, we find problems and then we go fix them instead of being proactive and trying to do things in a way that we're preventing the problems before they happen. But because we have such a backlog of these flooding areas, which you've seen on the maps, it's difficult for us to get ahead of the game. In 2003, the EPA implemented the small MS4 permit, which stands for Separate Storm Sewer System. So for municipalities who have drainage systems which are separate from their sanitary sewer, they fall under the provisions of this permit from the EPA and requires them to comply with 6 minimum control measures outlined in that permit. And in 2018, they came out with a new permit. Same 6 control measures, but a little stricter than it was before. And there's an increase in the cost that the town bears in complying with that permit. Additionally, with the aging infrastructure, we're trying to replace our infrastructure as best we can, but the funding is a challenge. Historically, we've used Chapter 90 funding, which is a state aid program through Mass DOT for roadway work. Right? So we're taking this roadway money from DOT and using it to fix our drainage problems and resurface our roads. Now EPA has come out with this permit with stricter requirements, which are going to cost the town more money to comply. So we've had to take a step back and say, well, how do we do this effectively? How do we manage our stormwater program in a way that we can get ahead of the game? So in 2019, we went to town meeting in October and we looked for implementation of a stormwater enterprise. That was passed by the voters, and what that's allowed the town to do is to properly fund the stormwater program, both the permit compliance under the EPA program, but also upgrade and repair and maintain the infrastructure that we have. That program generates approximately $1.1 million annually, and what that's allowed us to do is shift that Chapter 90 funding away from stormwater infrastructure and put it back towards roadways. So to give you some context, up until the stormwater enterprise was implemented, the town would spend approximately $500,000 to $550,000 on roadway resurfacing out of the $920,000 in Chapter 90 funding. So nearly $400,000 of Chapter 90 money was going to fix the drainage system or install new drainage, which wasn't there where there were areas of flooding. In FY23, so from this July moving forward, the town is going to put about approximately $1.25 million of Chapter 90 and supplemental Mass DOT funding towards roadway resurfacing. But we're also beefing up our stormwater program. We're also replacing culverts. We're installing drainage in areas where there's flooding, South Tewksbury, for example. So that stormwater enterprise has allowed us to not only beef up our stormwater program, but also improve our roadway paving program in town. There still are some challenges that we're facing, though. There still are a lot of areas in town, as you've seen, that are flooding. And we're trying to get through those and improve the infrastructure where we can. We're using nature-based solutions to do so. We've installed some rain gardens, and I'll show you some photos on those around Long Pond. We're doing underground chambers for recharge. And we're still challenged with the amount of work that needs to be done, but we've effectively come up with ways to address those problems, through the stormwater enterprise and shifting that burden off of the Chapter 90 funding. So here's some pictures of what we've done. Here's a picture of Water Street. We're going to break ground in the next week or so to address that flooding problem. Forest Avenue, here's a before picture. Now we've installed infrastructure out there to prevent that road from flooding. Vernon Street, same thing, and Beach Street as well. There's some during construction and after construction photos. One of the things that we see is these areas that flood aren't as much of a concern in the summer. The water goes away. But in the wintertime, when you get a warmer day and the snow melts, and at night it freezes, it just becomes a very hazardous driving condition in these areas. And that's one of the main factors in why we're trying to address this, is the safety of the public. Pinnacle Street, another great example of where we had to replace aging infrastructure. The culverts on Pinnacle Street failed. I'm not sure if folks here remember that we had the road closed, I want to say, for the better part of 6 months, because we didn't have the funding in place and we didn't have the ability to stay ahead of this aging infrastructure. Shawsheen Street, same thing. Culverts over near the Billerica Town line had to be replaced. And then Bayberry Lane is a project where it was an approved subdivision in 1993, 4 metal culverts. They've rotted out. We made an emergency repair in the fall, but we have to go back and we actually have to install a bridge to meet current standards to span that stream, that portion of the Heath Brook. And that project's going to cost well over $1 million to do, but we've gotten a total of $600,000 in funding from MassDOT, from the Small Bridge Program, and then we're supplementing that with the money we have from the Stormwater Enterprise for that replacement later this year. Another thing that we do with the stormwater funding is we look at the existing infrastructure, particularly detention basins, right? And I know there were photos earlier of the detention basins that hold the water during storms and treat it and release it at an acceptable rate. But sometimes those detention basins become overgrown and full of sediment. So we have a program where we go in and we rehabilitate those basins. And as you can see, Sawyer Lane on the left-hand side and Fieldstone Circle on the right-hand side. Fieldstone Circle's unrecognizable in the before condition. And you can see what it became afterwards when we brought it back to what it had been designed to look like and what it had been designed to do. So we're making sure that we bring those back to states where they're treating the runoff and they're holding the runoff so that it's not going to just be pushed downstream and flood other areas. And lastly, these are pictures of the Long Pond rain gardens, where we installed a total of 19 rain gardens around Long Pond to capture and treat runoff, because Long Pond has impairments. There are pollutants that get to Long Pond, and we want to prevent that, because that's a great resource and a great recreational area for the town. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Lauren.
Thank you, Kevin. As you can see, it's pretty impressive the work that's already been done. And a big thank you to the residents of Tewksbury for voting in that Stormwater Enterprise Fund. That's just very forward-thinking and incredible, and you can see the impact that it's going to have on your town. So, with that, we just wanted to kind of say what's going to happen next. With this project in particular, we're still working on some of the modeling, looking at that hydrological and hydraulic modeling. How are these different green infrastructure proposed activities going to help reduce or mitigate flooding in these particular areas. Also working on some costs and some final details about what it would take to implement them. And we're also going to do some more outreach. So if you are a fan of the farmers market, you can come hang out with us again on June 16th. We'll have some similar, maybe some updated aspects to this project that we can share with you. But what we really recommend is you go to the town website. So we have a very easy URL to follow, so tewksbury-ma.gov/flooding, and here you'll be able to kind of see all the work that's being done through this MVP action grant. This includes an interactive story map, so kind of building upon what Susie had talked about, looking at kind of the historical context, looking at how things could change in the future for climate change, and looking at some of these renderings maybe in more detail that we showed today. You can also find the full survey report. So those 123 people that responded to us, we put all of the responses into a report. So if you're interested, you can check that out on the website. And then the final project report will be available there in July. And we also finally just want to point out that we're at the beginning of this process. So stormwater will forever be something that we're managing in Tewksbury and around the country, around the world actually. And so I think we're making really great strides. But just remember that this is something that will keep coming up. And if we're proactive now, we're going to have better solutions and quality of life in the future. So with that, I think we're going to open it up for questions and comments. Again, for those of you in the room, you're more than welcome to just ask your question. For those on YouTube, you can go use the Menti again. So if you go to menti.com, we have a new code this time. So you can put in the code of 28877885. Again, this is mostly for the people on YouTube. If they want to ask questions, engage with the project team here. We have a couple more minutes to answer questions. And then afterwards, we're going to hang around. As you can see, there's a couple posters talking about green infrastructure and flooding around Tewksbury. If you want to check out the story map, there's a computer in the back there. We'll be there hanging out and can answer questions there as well. So for those that want to engage with the Menti, again, the code is 28877885. But for those in the room, you're welcome to raise your hand or make a comment. We have the whole team here, and they can answer any question that you have. Yes, sir.
Hang on one second, just so everybody online.
Thank you. In regards to the water gardens around Long Pond, I moved there about 6 years ago, and they had just started installing those thereabouts. Were they originally intended to be monitored by the town or maintained by the town? Because most of the ones that I see around the pond now seem to be abandoned, and I know there's been some attempt to keep those clean, to keep them, to pull out all the weeds and the vegetation that's growing. But it seems like most of them have been abandoned. And the one that was put on my property is probably the largest one. And I didn't realize it, but after we were living there for a year, the town kind of told us that they would like it if we were responsible for it. So, and we have to put mulch. We get a lot of mulch. And we do our own weeding now because it's right there on my property. I want to keep it nice looking and working as it should. But what about that with the ones that seem to have been abandoned? I don't know if anyone has noticed that.
Thank you. That's that is a great question. So we did have the 19 rain gardens constructed. There's a variety of maintenance agreements with homeowners to maintain some of them. Others are to be maintained by the town. And historically, there'd been Earth Day cleanups that were cleaning those. Sometimes that didn't happen, or they didn't get to as many as they had anticipated. The DPW stepped in to do some of them. But we're currently looking at a way to utilize the stormwater funding on an annual basis to maintain that infrastructure. So that is in the works, to make sure that we're maintaining all of those consistently.
Will they eventually supply me with mulch, or am I supposed to continue to supply that on my own? Because it's quite a bit early.
Yeah, that's a great question. If I can get your contact information, I can look at which rain garden and we'll figure that out.
It's not the biggest one on the farm. It requires quite a bit of mulch.
I'm sure it does, yeah.
I mean, that's the issue that we have the detention basin in our front yard, and I mean, it was put in 1990, and it was, oh, sorry. Sure. We have a detention basin in our front yard, and it was put in 1990 before I bought the property. And basically, it appears back then, what the EPA was doing was just dig a hole, take sections of pipe out, and whatever else happens, happens. So, I mean, we've maintained it over the years, obviously because it's in our front yard, but now we're getting older, so it's like it's a big, deep hole. So we're hoping to, that's why I'm coming to learn more about this, because we're hoping to get a contractor. I mean, we're willing to pay for this because it's our front yard, to better design it and put in a rain garden, because right now it's just a hole. There's nothing that's absorbing the water. It's just dirt on the ground. But I guess my question too is that the town comes and cleans out the catch basins, but just once a year. That doesn't take care of the silt, and because you sand the roads in the wintertime. And so what I would like to know too is that could part of the maintenance plans be better maintenance of the catch basins around these structures, so that we don't have to go down there and dig out all the silt, so that the whole, in other words, the pipe works the way it should. So is that something that the town's thinking about as well?
Another great question, thank you. So part of this stormwater enterprise, which again it's only 2 years old, we're just going through the second year, is there's funding for drain manhole and drain line cleaning. And there's additional funding for catch basin cleaning. So under the EPA permit, we're required to come up with what they call a catch basin cleaning optimization plan, where when we do our cleaning, we measure how much silt is in that catch basin, and we're required to keep that silt less than half of the depth in that catch basin. So we're going through, we've got, well over 3,000 catch basins in town. We've got to clean them all at least once a year, and then we go out a second time to get the problem ones, the ones that are catching more sediment than others. The other thing that we've done over the last 4 or 5 years is we've actually gotten away from using sand during the winter, and we use salt. And we also use a pre-treatment of brine, so that we're not getting that sediment heavy deposits in those catch basins like we had in years past. But you are right. We are creating a plan, the catch basin optimization plan for cleaning, as well as the drain line cleaning. And I believe I know your property. You're on Cart Path.
Yeah.
Yes, we've spoke before. Right. Yep. And, you saw some of the detention basins we were cleaning. That we basically started with the worst ones and try to rehabilitate those and move through the list. I know, we've been out there and looked at the one on your property, and it's not in bad shape. And we thank you for that. But, it is on our list of items to address.
I mean, again, I'm just looking for the future to help maintain it, and with whatever we do to make it work better, then the town can help to maintain it.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one other thing that we didn't get into in this presentation but is available on the story map is some resources for how to manage stormwater on your own property, some ideas and tips and plans even for how to develop a rain garden on your own property. So folks who don't yet have a rain garden, which it sounds like some of you do, which is awesome, you can check that out. There's also some information on this poster. So if you're interested, I know this is mostly focused on what the town's been doing and been up to and kind of how this project has come about, but there are also resources on the story map on the website if you're interested. Saw your hand first.
I wonder what the plan is in the town for making certain that all new surfaces are permeable. I live on Shawshene Street. We have these wonderful sidewalks. Love them. Please don't mistake me. I love the sidewalks. But they're impervious. We now have flooding. And unfortunately, all the water is also being directed down my driveway and into my yard and into my garage. So I'm wondering what the town is going to do for future projects to make sure this doesn't happen to other homeowners and on other streets. Because sidewalks are great. They're good, but unfortunately it blocked all of the drainage into the wetlands.
Thank you. That's a really good question. So that Shawshene Street sidewalk, it's still under construction. There's some stormwater infrastructure, actually rain garden and a detention pond that are being constructed for that over near Mohawk. And there are other upgrades to the stormwater management system along the way that's going to be implemented to collect that extra runoff. As far as the impervious versus pervious surface goes, when you have porous pavement, that has to be maintained. That has to be vacuum swept almost monthly in order to maintain its pervious nature, which means the town would have to buy pieces of equipment in order to do that or contract it out. The easier solution for us is to create those impervious sidewalks, put it into the existing infrastructure along the roadway, and then build other BMPs such as the rain garden and the detention basin, which we are doing. I'm a fan of impervious pavement. I've always been a fan of impervious pavement, but when it comes to, porous pavement, but when it comes to maintenance of that, it's a challenge to ensure that it stays porous and pervious for a very long time, which we just don't have the capabilities currently in town.
Is done that the rainwater or the stormwater mitigation is done first before the surfaces are put in, because it sounds like the rain gardens and all of the stormwater mitigation is happening after everything's been built, and meanwhile, and like my house is flooding, and so are a lot of driveways along Shawshene, and a lot of like Low Street is flooding every time it rains.
So that's a great question. The way that we construct the sidewalks is we like to get the sidewalks in first. Now the drainage is already done with the exception of those two BMPs along Shawshene near Mohawk, right? The catch basin structures have been either adjusted or modified as they need to along the road. And then we put the sidewalk in. And the last thing we do is we come back and do the driveway aprons, which will keep the water in the road as opposed to letting it go into other properties. I kind of liken it to, when you build a house, you want to know where you want to put the outlets. Well, you don't put the drywall up first and then say, yeah, I want one here, and then take the drywall down to run the wires to it. There's a process in which we have to construct this. And like I said, the last thing that we're going to do is go back and do all the driveway aprons along Shawshene Street to ensure that water stays in the roadway and doesn't go into the property. So like I said before, we're still under construction, so it's not a finished product yet. So if we can just kind of bear with us for the next few months, and they'll be coming back to finish it. Yeah, if we can connect after and you can give me your address, I'm not sure I'm aware of this issue. All right. Right, but not me personally. That's, yeah. So, all right, thank you.
I see there are some questions submitted on the Menti, potentially from folks at home, so I just wanted to make sure we get those on here. After the 5 sites are done, how will the next sites be addressed? I think that's referring to the prioritization for the green infrastructure. I don't know who's the right person to address this one, Weston Sampson or Kevin, or maybe both a little bit.
So just talking here about like after these 5 sites are constructed, is that what we're saying? Like in terms of furthering the project after that? Or, oh, okay, sorry. I mean, I guess I was just going to say that the program that the town received funding through, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program, that is an annual grant program. And so I think the town kind of sees this project as hopefully the first phase with hopes of applying for additional funding in future years. It's a wonderful program. There's a lot of funding available. So opportunities for the town to pursue design of construction, or design for these sites, as well as future construction and also additional planning efforts as well. So.
And the project that's underway gives the town a repository of project ideas and locations, like that's the whole big picture screening, which will fit into future like roadway work and municipal facility work. So it's sort of like a catalog available.
Yeah, so I guess in summary, we'll have the list, and we looked at 38 sites. We picked the top 5, and once those are constructed, we'll just continue down the list and address the problems as funding is available.
Gentleman over here with a question.
Thank you. I'm just curious what other towns and cities may be doing to incentivize, new and existing developments to install, green building measures, green roofs, blue roofs, covered parking spaces, solar panels, various types of construction that would help mitigate stormwater runoff and quality. I'm just curious because most developers, just want to go by what's required, not by what, might be better for the town in the long run. Any suggestions there?
That's a great question. I know the LEAD program through GBCI is a program where you can get points and you can get a certification based on your development. Whether it's a silver or platinum, it means it's a green building or a green development. But all that really does is get you a plaque on the wall, and it costs a lot of money to put those pieces together to get those scores. You make a great point. The development community is only going to really do what they have to do in their best interest for the most part. I think it's on us as administrators to really come up with a plan. What are we looking for out of developments? What would be in the best interest of the town? When a development is proposed, and then hopefully the developers come to the table and we see eye to eye and can turn good projects into great projects for the community.
Yeah, I just want to have one more thing. That's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I know Kevin alluded to the MS4 program, and so there's a lot of different changes that are going to be happening as related to the requirements of that permit. And so right now we're actually looking at their green infrastructure requirements as they're laid out currently in the town stormwater regs. So there's going to be certain changes that are going to be proposed related to that the town will be implementing. And so that will hopefully incentivize use of green infrastructure too on private development as well.
And then some other communities are actually recognizing the very point that you made and actually doing like a very thorough review of like zoning, and not just for stormwater, but like really comprehensively rethinking climate resilience in the local code, so beyond flooding. And so that's a tool that's communities are starting to try, and this program has been funding some of those projects, but that's still very progressive thinking.
Do you have a follow-up? Sure, thank you.
If I could just add a couple more points. You know, I know that DCAM has a requirement, like LEED is not a requirement, as you know, with the building code, but DCAM requires developments to be LEED Silver certifiable, which is probably very comparable to the building code, actually. You know, I think there has to be some other incentive there, you know, whether it's a need, you know, because ultimately when things start failing down the road, the developers are long gone, and we, the people, end up assuming the costs of all that, you know, of repairing all of those problems. So I just think that that's something that should be a topic of conversation and as developments come and go in town. And I would also like to thank these folks here for stepping up as citizens and going ahead and taking care of the rain gardens there. I think that's pretty awesome. And I think if everybody chips in a little, makes a big difference. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to take this one online and then we'll come to you next. How frequently will rehabilitated detention basins be mowed? Back to you, Kevin.
I don't have a definitive answer for that. Like I said, we're 2 years into the permit, the enterprise with our funding. We're trying to get through rehabilitating the basins, but this year we're actually going to be putting out our first mowing contract. And within that contract, we're going to define how frequently we mow. And you know, it's going to be a balance between the money spent to rehabilitate the basins that are really in bad shape versus, you know, mowing an extra couple times a year, you know, to keep the grass short in other basins. So I don't have an answer, but we're working on that.
Thank you. I just want to compliment the quality of the presentations, and it's been very illuminating, and you've provided some really good information, some good background. And in that same vein, I think, as Jim was saying, I've kind of, this problem, I'm getting the impression, has really arisen over a period of time, and it will take time to change and to do things differently. And I just wonder if, and anyone here wants to chime in, and just, if you could summarize, I think I heard it in the presentation, what would you say are the benefits of making this change, about enhancing the resources, about how we do stormwater management? The benefits to the people who are on this flooded street, they're fairly obvious, but for other people that maybe are interested in this, have come to this meeting, have listened in, and they're saying we need to support this. But if you could just summarize perhaps the benefits of why enhancing this area, enhancing the resources would be a benefit to many, I think it would be helpful.
Well, we get our drinking water from the Merrimack River, so stormwater.
You can go ahead. I'm sure we all have something to say. I'm sure we could all pass the mic. Maybe we will. So from the Merrimack River Watershed Council, we think of things from a real watershed perspective. So what falls from the sky or from your car or from your dog or anything that happens inside the watershed ends up in the streams in that watershed. So, you know, by improving the way that stormwater is managed, you not only allow the watershed to act as it naturally would, but that water gets filtered through the ground. So bacteria or pollutants off the road or pollutants off of someone's yard, fertilizer, any kind of something that could run off of those yards, or farmland, pesticides, by allowing the watershed to act as the natural system that it is, that water can be filtered before it enters the Shawsheen or the Merrimack downstream, so it keeps our waterways cleaner. As you mentioned, those waterways are a source of drinking water. They're also a source of recreational use. I was overhearing a little bit that some folks have been using Long Pond for recreation, but maybe the water quality isn't so great there. So by returning these systems to function as they naturally did, which green infrastructure allows an area to do or helps an area to do, you can have the benefits of a natural system, the filtering of the water and cleaner waterways downstream. There are loads of other benefits, so I'll pass it so multiple people can No others. Jenny, I know you probably have a million.
I mean, this kind of goes back to the slide when we first presented the nature-based solutions concept, and there's all the co-benefits. So that's the word language the state uses and we use in talking about this. Property values improve. You reduce the long-term impacts from urban heat islands. So even in Tewksbury, like I had said before, if you have areas with lots and lots of pavement, even if it's like a parking lot, I know we've all felt this. You walk out, you've gone to your shopping plaza, you go outside, and it is hot in that parking lot. When you get home and you're in your driveway and there's some trees, it's much better. So just helping reduce that. Gosh, I'm missing up into them. We already talked about pollution reduction. Let's see, creating habitats, another one too. I mean, we've spent a long time paving roadways so we can all get around, and in doing that, we have taken away habitat space. So getting space for pollinators, getting space for, you know, small animals that we're not thinking about. Who wants to go next? Yeah?
And I think also thinking about this now in a prevention stage saves us a lot of money in the reaction stage. I think Kevin also gave an example of this when one of the culverts blew out, and it just cost way more money than it would have if you know, we had been able to kind of get to that preventative stage and do that. So a lot of these green infrastructure things, thinking about stormwater now, will save a lot of money down the road. It might feel like the price tag is very expensive, but trust us, it'll be more expensive later when everything breaks and we have to fix it in a rush and shut down the road for 6 months and all these kinds of things. So I think there are many reasons to kind of think about this now and consider it now and fund it now. Like, you know, you guys have voted to do the Stormwater Enterprise, which is fantastic. And, you know, Kevin has already have dozens of projects that he wants to do with those funds. And you can see that they're gonna have a real impact on people of this community. Yeah, one more.
And I think we have one more question.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say quickly that a lot of this overlaps with the town's requirements under their MS4 permit, which I know we've been mentioning, but one thing to mention is that there's portions of the Merrimack River that are actually impaired for phosphorus that the town discharges upstream of, and so under the town's MS4 permit, the town's required to develop what's called the Phosphorus Source Identification Report, and basically as part of that report, the town is required to look at different BMP retrofit opportunities and opportunities to infiltrate stormwater, because that's really when it comes to treatment for phosphorus, it's all about infiltrating stormwater. And so all of these nature-based solutions that we're talking about today is going to help with that phosphorus impairment. And down the road, a lot of impairments that are on what's called the 303D list of integrated list of waters. Eventually those impairments get what's called a total maximum daily load, where there's a certain waste load allocation that the town will need to meet with respect to phosphorus. So the town will have to demonstrate how they're meeting that waste load allocation by removing a certain amount of phosphorus. And we're seeing that in other parts of Massachusetts, specifically with the Charles River Watershed. All of those communities right now are required to implement a phosphorus control plan. And so it's a very extensive and expensive effort to implement. And so I think anything that the town can do now to kind of get ahead of this and start implementing those nature-based solutions will be to the, you know, the town's benefit in the long run. Yep.
Hi, thank you. Would you just, hello, thank you. Would you just discuss the affordable housing component of the grant program?
Yeah, well, we do have somebody on our steering committee from the Affordable Housing Authority of Tewksbury. She's not here with us tonight. I'll do what I can, but if others from the town, maybe Alex has a little bit more she could share. We do know that the state of Massachusetts has a requirement for a percentage of housing units in a community to be of the affordable threshold, for example. And so Tewksbury is actively looking for locations to add some more units to town. And they've been active in doing this, so this kind of dovetails with efforts that has already been happening around affordable housing, locations, types of affordable housing, multi-unit versus single-family homes for ownership, for rental, things like that. But it's also kind of considering, okay, if we're going to put affordable housing on a town parcel, we want to make sure that we're kind of incorporating all this work that we're doing around stormwater, and you know, we're not going to put it in an area where people may experience a lot of flooding and, have to walk to work and there's puddles everywhere. One example kind of thing. So, Jenny, did you want to say something?
Did you want to say? Yeah.
So going back to some of those climate vulnerable populations and kind of prioritizing sites based on where those sites are located in proximity, the affordable housing was taken into account when kind of looking through the site. So if it was closer to an affordable housing site, if it was close to a future potential affordable housing site, again, if a parcel could potentially be affordable housing in the future, those were kind of prioritized when looking at all the sites on the town-wide level.
Thanks. I was just going to add too, there was a section on the survey that we conducted to kind of understand people's interests and preferences in affordable housing development around town, and kind of what types of affordable housing should be developed, what kind of ownership should it be, to own, to rent, like Lauren mentioned, single, double or multi-unit housing. So that information was captured from the respondents of the survey and is available for the town to consider in their decision-making process, along with flooding resilient or climate resilient locations as well. Good question. We did very much streamline this presentation to not make it be 2 hours long to really focus on the flooding aspect, but thank you for asking, because it's a really important part of the project.
Stormwater does not go to the wastewater treatment plant, so be mindful of fertilizers and pesticides and pet waste and just how we treat the water, because it goes to the Merrimack River, the Concord River, Shawshene River, Long Pond, Ames Pond. What other waterways, Kevin? How many outfalls do we have? Yeah. So any storm drains are going to a water body or wildlife area in our community. Thank you for this good work.
Thank you. That is a great reminder and comment to wrap up on. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Thanks for those who hung out online and were watching from home. We'll continue this project, as we mentioned, so check out the town's website to keep learning, and visit us at the farmers market. The first farmers market will be there. Thanks so much, everyone.